You're all too young to remember this. There was actually, anybody ever hear of Elvis Presley? Okay, so I know you're too young. I mean, I'm almost too young to remember Elvis Presley. He's not my generation, but I certainly do remember him. There was a musical made about Elvis Presley. If you've never seen it, it's kind of cute. It's called Bye Bye Birdie. Has anybody ever heard of that? Oh yeah, okay, so a few of you know that one. All right, so that was actually about Elvis Presley going into the army. And he got drafted, and when he got drafted, they made this musical about that. And one of the songs in the musical, go back and listen to it. It's a cute song. Go on YouTube when you have a chance. It's called Kids. And the tagline of the song is, why can't they be like we were, perfect in every way? What's the matter with kids today? Okay? So that's you guys. What's the matter with you guys? Now, what do I mean by what's the matter with you guys? Well, if you look at the employment rate, so this is not kids, but it's what we call prime age workers. It's those people in the prime of their careers, 25 to 54 years old. And if you look at the employment rate, in 2000, it was 82%. Look at the employment rate at the peak of the, right before the recession, and it was a little over 80%. And where is it now? It's about 79%. So there's a downward trend in this, and the question is, why? What's going on? Because that's a challenge. That's a big challenge. If people aren't working, we worry why that is. Now, turns out it's the men. It's not the women. Okay? And again, that's an empirical statement. You kind of know that, actually. Why do we know that? How would you know that? How else do you see that women are outdoing the men? Where else do you see it? Everywhere where you guys are. Go ahead, what are you going to say? Higher education, exactly. We know that college enrollment rates are higher for women than they are for men. So this tends to be a problem primarily for men, and it's especially a problem for less educated men. So the college-educated men, you guys, you may not be as good as the women, but you're okay? But the ones that are really suffering right now are the less educated men. And the question is that because they're lazy and playing video games, or is something else going on? So I want to show you one more chart, and then I'm going to jump to immigration. I already promised I was going to do that a minute ago. But I want to show you this because this is really cool. So this chart shows the relationship between unemployment rates and new applications for disability insurance. If you have a disability, and that's defined basically by, you go through a set of screens and so forth, you apply, and then if they determine that you have a disability and you can't work, then you can get Social Security, you get Social Security benefits early. And what you see here is that when the unemployment rate goes up, people start applying for these disability benefits. Now, when most people look at that, what do they think? What do you think? What's your gut reaction? Be honest. What did you say? Go ahead. Okay, lazy, but maybe even worse. Taking advantage of the system. Fraud. Yeah, taking advantage. You could even say fraud, right? It almost seems like, that's one interpretation of this. I think that's the wrong, I don't want to say wrong. There's always fraud in a government system. Whenever you have a government system, there's always going to be fraud. No doubt about that, okay? You can never have a system that is enforced perfectly. This doesn't say that. What this says is that people respond to incentives. That's really what this says. And the way to see it is not just as it goes up. Look at what happens when it goes down. That's actually more compelling. When the unemployment rate goes down, people don't apply for disability benefits. Now, why is that important? Because it says if jobs are available, you won't exercise your option to go on disability. So let's be generous. Don't be cynics. Let's take the most positive view of what people are doing and suppose that everybody who applies for disability is entitled to it. We know that's not true, but again, humor me for a moment. Assume that everybody who applies for it is entitled to it. Still, you have a choice. You can say, am I willing to take disability benefits and live off of that, or would I rather work and kind of work through the pain? You know, it's kind of like, this is like the NFL. You got to play even if you're hurt, right? Okay. So question is, would I be willing to do that? And the answer is, well, it depends on what I get from working. And if jobs are available, if the unemployment rate is low, if I can get good salary, good wages, maybe I'll go to work. Okay, and I'll say I won't exercise that option. Even though I'm entitled, I won't exercise that option. Now, why is that related to the Elvis Presley stuff? The reason it's related to the Elvis Presley, what's the matter with kids today, is because what this says is that the fact that it's young men, and particularly young, less educated men who are not working, suggests that there's a problem in the labor market for those guys. And what do you think that problem is? The problem is they don't have skills that can earn them high wages in the current labor market. So that points to a solution to this problem, which we won't have time to talk about unless you ask me after. And the solution is basically you got to have people with skills that are suited to a modern economy, not to an economy that, you know, is one that we had in the 1950s and 1960s. So that's what's wrong with kids today. Okay? And by the way, women don't suffer from that as much as the men because, again, the skills that women have were never the kinds of skills that were well suited to the 50s manufacturing economy. All right, so let me show you one picture because this is going to lead us in. Oh, I didn't talk about tariffs. Oh man, so much to do in so little time. Okay, I got to tell you about tariffs. I got to tell you real quickly, okay? Tariffs is like what everybody's talking about. By the way, I told Josh that I was just editing a piece for the Wall Street Journal. They said it was going to run on Thursday. I usually write a piece every couple of months or so in the Wall Street Journal. They said this one was going to run on Thursday. So look for it on Thursday. They always tell me it's going to run on day X, and it runs on day X plus 2 weeks. So I don't know that it'll be there, but look for it on Thursday. I'll tell you what it's about. It's about tariffs. And it's about Harley Davidson, because believe it or not, I actually have a Harley. And I've ridden motorcycles my whole life. And we, when I was in the government, a group of us, the cabinet guys who rode Harleys, and there were lots of them, as it turned out, there were about 10 of us, led the Rolling Thunder Parade. Has anybody ever heard of Rolling Thunder? No? Yeah, good. Okay, we got some people. Yeah, I know. Yeah, all right. So Rolling Thunder is the Memorial Day parade, starts at the Pentagon, drives down Constitution Avenue, and ends up at the other end of the mall. We led these guys into the White House, and they had a meeting with President Bush, okay? Now, why is that relevant? The reason it's relevant is because President Trump recently tweeted that he hopes everybody will boycott Harley Davidson. Do you remember? Anybody see that? You know when that was? What happened was President Trump imposed tariffs. The retaliation by Europe was they then raised their tariffs on American motorcycles to 25%. Harley then responded by saying, okay, we will produce those motorcycles that are sold in Europe in another country so that they are not subject to the tariff. President Trump then went after them and said, oh, that's terrible, and I hope everybody boycotts Harley Davidson, okay? So, pieces on that. Question is whether the tariffs are a good idea. Answer very briefly is even if you think that China is eating our lunch, tariffs aren't going to do much about that. Why is that? 2 points. One, even if we eliminated all exports to China, our exports to China consist of about 0.5% of our GDP. So if you eliminated all of them, everything that, if you doubled let me say it another way. If you doubled what we do for China to China right now, double it, you're going to get 0.5% of GDP. That's it. Now, what if you said no imports from China? Well, that'll hurt China. People think that's going to hurt China a whole lot. How much will it hurt China? It'll hurt them a whole lot. About a little over 4% of GDP. That's about 8 months of growth in China. So you basically set China back 8 months from where they are now. That's not a good thing, but the point is we are not the 800-pound gorilla that we think we are, nor would eliminating anything from China and doubling our exports and saying, okay, you guys have to have a level playing field, what would that do for us? A little bit, not very much at all, okay? So the point is, it's not that big a deal. It's not going to transform the economy. The problems, when we have problems in the American economy, they are primarily our own doing and not so much China. Doesn't mean China doesn't have an effect, but not so much China. Okay, I want to turn to immigration. Now we're going to go there. Let me leave you with something, start with something actually, that I'd like to show you because it's a nice lead into immigration. How many people think it's a good thing for immigrants to be assimilated into the United States? How many think that's a good thing? Most of it. As historically, we've always thought of that as one of the strengths of the United States. So what this picture shows is a measure of assimilation. It's not a perfect measure, but it's a measure. And what is that measure? Well, one way to measure whether immigrants get assimilated is to say, are they working? Do they get jobs? It's not the only measure, of course, but that's one. So what I did was I took the unemployment rate among immigrants and I looked at that as a ratio relative to the unemployment rate among the native-borns, okay? And what you see in this chart, look at Germany, for example. Anybody from Germany in here? No, nobody from Germany at all? Okay. Well, Germany has historically had a large number of immigrants. By the way, these data predate the recent immigration from the Middle East with Syria and so forth. This stuff is before that. But Germany's always had lots of immigrants. And what you see is that the unemployment rate among immigrants in Germany is almost double, at number 2, almost double the unemployment rate among the native-born Germans. And that's true for every other G7 country except the United States. I didn't put Japan on there because Japan doesn't have immigrants. So to a first approximation, that's actually true. But it's true for every other country, not true of the United States. In the US, surprisingly, perhaps, immigrants actually have lower unemployment rates than the native-born population, lower. And as I say, I think that's surprising, but what it tells you is two things. It tells you, one, immigrants are here to work, they come to work, and two, they're actually successful at getting jobs. So that's a pretty encouraging statistic, okay? So I want to turn now to immigration in general. Let me move on to immigration, and let's talk a little bit about immigration. I want to give you a few facts. We're not going to have too much time to do this, but I'll open it up for discussion, and then you can ask me more about it. Where do our immigrants come from? Well, this chart shows you the distribution of immigrants from source countries. Obviously, Mexico is number 1, and we have 4 times as many immigrants from Mexico as we do from any other country. Then next would be Philippines, India, and China, and Vietnam, slightly behind. Cuba, of course, also a lot of people from Cuba, from the exodus from Cuba after Castro came in. But basically, what this tells you is that our immigration tends to be concentrated from a few countries. Why do you think that is? Anybody have any ideas? Why do you think that happens? What caused that? Please.
I would surmise that.
Yeah, Mike. Yeah, good. Yeah, take Zach's mic. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, that's on. I would surmise that people don't want to leave the country that they're from unless they absolutely need to. So I would assume, and I know that in these countries there are certain factors, whether it be violence, political unrest, regimes that aren't favorable to certain individuals, those are the factors, or unemployment in general,
Okay.
that force people out.
Okay, good. Let me let you follow because you seem to have something you wanted to add to that, please.
Also, in
Yeah.
one of the Wall Street Journal articles we read, you talked about American policies that favor family reunification, so that 60% of people who are coming actually already have family in the U.S.
Okay, so it's a combination of the two. So your point, let me say something to your point. So I've actually looked at this from in different countries. We were talking about Scandinavia before. Let's talk about Sweden. If you look at the distribution of immigrants in Sweden, they come from the major suppliers, other than Denmark and Finland, which are obviously the contiguous countries, and also Scandinavian, are Bosnia, Iraq, Somalia, Eritrea, Sudan. Those aren't the countries that we have, right? And you say, well, wait a minute, why are those people going to Sweden and we have a completely different distribution of immigrants? In fact, give you another statistic, our immigrants are different even from Canada. So Canada doesn't have lots of Mexicans. They're like Mexico is number 10 on the list of source countries. So you have two things going on. Your point is supply, surely right. You got to want to get out. That's surely right. And there are reasons why people want to get out. But there's also the policy on the other side, which I won't quite call demand because it's really more of a rationing policy. But there's the policy on the other side. So what happened, give you a fact to kind of, you two guys are talking about sort of different sides of the same issue. Here's a fact. In 1965, we changed our immigration policy. And before 1965, immigration was based essentially on how many people were in the United States from your country. So for example, if you came from England, if you were in England and you wanted to migrate to the United States, it was easy to get here because there were lots of people from England who were in the United States. So there's a big quota. Whereas if you came from, say, Bosnia, there wouldn't be many people here. It would be much harder to get in. After 1965, we changed the policy, and what ended up happening was we went very strongly in the direction of a family reunification policy. So right now, about 60 to 70% come in on the basis of family reunification. Different policy, not necessarily better, not necessarily worse, but different. And so you got a very different distribution of countries being represented after 65 than before 65. Now the question is, what do we want to do? So now policy matters, supply matters as well, but let's say that there are people who want to come here. By the way, just to give you a perspective on the supply side, supply is really important, and the best evidence for supply is that in any given year, there are about 4.5 times as many people who apply for green cards as get them. 4.5 times. And that doesn't even count the people who don't even bother to apply because they think there's no chance of getting them. So we know there's a huge queue of people who would like to come into the United States. So now the question is, who do we go for? This is a tough question. It's a tough question. And in order to think about this question, what's the right policy, you have to think about whose welfare, who are we trying to help by this policy? Who do we have in mind? So one policy is we just care about the native-born population. I won't have you vote on this. I just want you to think about it. I'll just give you the list, and you guys can argue about it tonight at dinner or something. So one is the well-being of the native-born population, and then what you would think about is who's most complementary to the native-born population, whose skills are most complementary, because they're going to be the ones that are best for us, okay, for the native-born. Another thing you might think about is you care about the immigrants and how well they do when they get here. That would be, issues of assimilation come in when you're thinking about this, because you want to take people into the country who will then do well when they're here. But that's a pretty narrow group, because those are the ones who succeed in getting here, either because of the supply side, as you're talking about, or because of the rationing side, as you were talking about. That's still not the entire world, and you'd say, well, maybe we're being too selective or too elitist by thinking about only those people. What about people, in these war-torn areas that Sweden took that we're not taking? Shouldn't we be worrying about those people? So that's another thing. Or you could think about this in a global sense, if you want to think of yourself as a citizen of the world as opposed to a U.S. citizen. And if you'd thought about it that way, you'd say, well, wait a minute. When we think of getting educated and talented immigrants, other countries call that brain drain. What we call getting highly educated immigrants, they're essentially losing those people. We might want to take that into account. For example, anybody in here from El Salvador, family from El Salvador? Anybody? All right, well, El Salvador, turns out we have 1 million Salvadorans in the United States. The whole country of El Salvador has 6 million people. So we have taken a sixth of that country, and it's now in the United States. Do you think it's a random sixth of that country? Probably not. So the question is, what does that policy do to El Salvador? That's something else to think about. All right, let me give you some facts. We're running out of time. This is fun. Here's a game. Let's play a game. You like games. See those 3 countries there? What I want you to do is rank those 3 countries, Algeria, Israel, and Japan, in terms of educational attainment of their immigrants in the United States. So we have immigrants from everywhere in the world. Algeria is one place we have immigrants from. Israel's another place, Japan. Don't shout it out, but do this in your head. And if you were to rank which countries are the sources of our most educated immigrants, you got them? You got your order in your head? Okay. The answer is that's the order. Algeria is number 1, Israel 2, Japan 3. Why is that? Well, again, it's primarily because of the sorting. It's primarily because of the story that if you got here from Algeria, we don't take a lot of Algerians into the United States. So if you got here from Algeria, chances are you got a PhD in electrical engineering, okay? That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but not much. And so the point is that the policy determines the attainment, how well people do when they're here. And I've done a lot of research on this recently. And what I find is that the source country, the education, the income, the GDP growth, anything you want, distance, basically anything you can think of the source country has almost nothing to do with how well immigrants from those countries do when you're here. Now, this is relevant because, again, this was very controversial, but remember the president, decided certain countries should be excluded for reasons having nothing to do with this. It had to do with national security. It was a completely different argument. But the point here is that you can't pick people based on their source countries. So, for example, India. I don't know if anybody. I keep asking anybody from anywhere. No one's from anywhere here. I guess you're all from California. But if you think about people whose families were originally from India and came here from India, India is way high in terms of educational attainment in the United States. It's number 2. Number 2. India's education level is half that of Mexico. Half. So the average education in India is 4 years. It's almost at the bottom. It's not like India is an educated country. It's just that the people that we get from India who are here are highly educated, and that's a function of our policy, in large part the H-1B policy that brings in tech engineers and so forth. Okay.